Okay. Good morning. The Hearing Board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. The time is just after 9:05 a.m., and we are meeting in the Hearing Board room in Diamond Bar. We have one matter on the agenda for today, which is Mount San Jacinto Winter Park Authority doing business as Palm Springs Aerial Tramway, 5906-4 for an interim variance, and then we'll have the hearing board general meeting once that matter is concluded. So who is representing the Palm Springs Aerial Tramway this morning?
Good morning. My name is Marjorie, M-A-R-J-O-R-I-E, Delacruz, D-E-L-A-C-R-U-Z. I am the Vice President of Human Resources and Risk Management.
Thank you. And who's representing the executive officer today?
Karen Manwaring on behalf of the executive officer.
Thank you. Okay, we have received one exhibit, and it is interim variance proposed conditions, and I believe that came from the district, so we'll mark that as Exhibit A as in apple. Okay, and just a reminder, because today's hearing has, well, if it should continue, would be without notice to the public, we're going to bifurcate our proceedings today, and we're going to begin first, board members and for Ms. De La Cruz. We're going to begin with our findings for good cause in the absence of notice to the public, which are in our hearing board rules. And Ms. De La Cruz, you've been before us before, have you?
I have, yes.
And have you been before us on an interim or an emergency basis?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so are you familiar with the findings we need to make on good cause?
I am.
Okay, so I don't need to go through those. And then if we can find good cause to proceed in absence of notice to the public, we will then proceed to the merits. So Ms. De La Cruz, if you would like to give an opening on good cause to proceed in the absence of notice to the public, this would be the great time.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the board. On the morning of February 14th, 2019, the tramway experienced heavy rains and flash flood that caused extensive damage to our roadways, power lines, and impacted our drinking water supply. Based on those events, our business has been closed since the 14th of February, and our anticipated reopening date is currently April 1st. We are working diligently to make the necessary repairs to our road and other infrastructure so that we may resume normal operations. As we move through the repair process, we ask that the board grant the interim variance for us because of the power line that was severed, the main power line that feeds the mountain station and where the generators are located, which are the source of our request today. We have brought with us video to show you the weather-related event that occurred the morning of the 14th, and if the board should so desire, we would like to show that to you as evidence related to our position this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Manwaring, your opening on good cause.
I'll be very brief. The district does not anticipate opposing today's request. As a brief reminder, they've been before us in previous years, and the district has been unopposed. Slight difference is that in prior years, it's usually been October or November when they come up towards their 200 hours. Here we are in the beginning of March, and the request is here. I'd also like to remind this board, in prior years, the district has advised the facility to consider acquiring additional engines. They've done that. You'll hear testimony that they have a pair of engines there that still was not able to overcome the situation that we see ourselves in today. So we do not anticipate objecting, and we have presented as Exhibit A some proposed conditions we'd like to see in place. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. I'm going to ask anyone who wishes to testify to please rise to be sworn in, including Ms. De La Cruz, if you'd like yours to be taken as evidence. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, Ms. Manwaring, unless you have any objection, we'll take the opening by Ms. De La Cruz as evidence.
No objection.
Okay. Ms. De La Cruz, if you'd like to continue, and if you'd like to continue with your evidence on good cause.
At this time, we would like to show you footage of the flash flood that brought down earth, boulder, and debris that severed the line that runs under our Valley Station building. And if Madam Clerk allows, great. We'll go ahead and, if you'd please turn your attention to the screen. Great. So this is at approximately 9:04, 9:05 a.m. This is running underneath our building. This is the picture of the creek. And you see where the logs, boulders came rushing underneath the building. Underneath the building, there is a main power line, a conduit line, that feeds power to the mountain station. And when the debris came under at 9:05 a.m., it severed that line. It arced and caused a very small fire at the Valley Station, but immediately triggered the use of generators at the mountain station. This is another view of the debris. So this has just passed our building and is now proceeding down the creek towards our bridge. And all of that debris ultimately, what it did is clog the culvert on our road so that the water had nowhere to go, and it compromised the road, and we have photographs of that to show you as well. Because the road was damaged, we have been unable until recently to have vehicle access to the tram, which has hindered our ability to get the needed materials to repair the damaged power line. It has also impacted our ability to address some of the drinking water issues we have. So this is video footage of the damaged road. You can see the culvert there. It's a 14-foot in diameter culvert that was simply clogged with all of the debris that you saw in the video just moments ago. So up until the last Thursday, it was helicopter access only to the tramway. We began the repairs of the road, and it is now passable, and we are going to begin the process of repairing the damaged electrical this Monday. On Monday, the 11th, we will begin the process of that. And we hope to have the line repaired by approximately the 18th of March. That repair would, in essence, restore normal power to the mountain station and no longer require the use of emergency power for fire suppression, fire monitoring, wastewater treatment, or any of the other needed processes that go on at the mountain station.
Thank you. Did you have additional testimony, Ms. De La Cruz, in terms of timing from February 14th forward? I know you had that in your petition before the filing occurred.
Yes, so included as an attachment with the variance petition is our chronology of events. So on February 10th, 2019, the meter readings logged well under the 200 hours. Our generator 1 had 0 hours, generator 2 had 26.4, generator 3 had 0 hours, and generator 4 had 25.7. On February 14th, again, at approximately 9 a.m., we had the damage to the power line. The tram closed. We evacuated employees of that day. And on February 15th, we began helicopter transport to begin the assessment and inspection of all of the various structures, buildings, roads, etc. We had our civil engineer and aerial engineer come out to assess the tram systems, towers, etc. And the tram was deemed operational and safe. So we were able, the morning of February 18th, to transport tramway personnel to the mountain station to assess what was going on with the power issues and the generators. So on the morning of February 18th, President's Day, notification by maintenance staff was made to myself, and I began the variance filings in understanding that we had already reached 156.2 hours on generator 2 and anticipated that the need for an interim variance would be required. On February 19th, I reached out and made contact with the clerk of the board regarding the variance filings. On February 20th of 2019, in working with maintenance staff to mitigate the use of emergency power, we attempted to limit the use from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. during hours where staff would not be on site for those emergency services, but it was not feasible due to frigid temperatures that led to pipes and valves freezing. We began to secure bids and the repair needed for the damaged power line, and the start date, subject to the roadway being repaired and access by vehicle feasible, because the material again could not be transported to the site until the road was cleared. On February 20th, I also made contact with Mr. Hemang Desai from the district regarding variance filings and emission data so we could ensure that we had the proper calculations listed. On Friday, February 22nd, the generator 1 had 0 hours, generator 2 had 200.9, generator 3, 104.7, and generator 4, 61 hours. Generator 2, there had been some equipment breakdown, and so we were able to transport via tram car a contractor to repair the second generator, the 250 kVA generator that we have. And so that was repaired on Friday the 22nd, and we were able to switch over from one of the generators to the second larger set also. And on that same day, roadway repairs began, and the interim and regular variance was sent via FedEx overnight to the clerk of the board. We do.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Excuse me.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. I didn't know if you had additional testimony.
We have brought with us the current log sheets that show what the hours are per generator as of yesterday morning. I have copies of each if the board should request to receive a copy.
That would be good and helpful.
Okay.
If you could just make sure Ms. Manwaring has a copy, and then if you want to give the remaining copies to the clerk for dissemination to the board. And once we receive it, we will mark the present log of the 4 generators as Exhibit 1 for petitioner. Dr. Lerner, you can take one and pass it down, please. Yes, the conditions were marked as A as an apple, and the log, which says Mountain Station Genset 1, but it's a multi-page, and so it's a page each for each of the 4 gensets. We'll mark that as Exhibit number 1, and you may proceed.
Thank you. So in referencing the chronology of events, on February 22nd, the hours that I had read, generator 1 had been at 0 hours. As of yesterday, March 4th, generator 1 is at 178.6 hours. That is the generator that was repaired on Friday, February 22nd. Generator 2 had 200.9 hours and is currently at 215.8. That is the generator, the larger 250 kVA that we had been using, that we transferred over and transferred power to Genset 1. Genset 3 had 104.7. As of yesterday, has 127.9. Generator 4 had 61 hours, and as of yesterday has 240.1 hours. So we have attempted to do all that we can, in keeping in mind, please, that we are closed to the public. So we are doing everything that is possible to run the most basic level of power that is needed in order to ensure the fire suppression monitoring and that pipes, et cetera, are not freezing at the mountain station. There are instances where we have been able to limit the use of power depending on the weather at the mountain to 12 hours per day, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And other times, there's currently 4 or 5 feet of snow at the mountain station. The temperatures have been such that we have been unable to do that, and it has required 24/7 power. Are there any questions I might be able to answer related to that?
Yes, there will be, and I'm going to ask Ms. Manwaring if she has any questions first.
I have no questions that go to good cause. I'll have some questions, shall we proceed, regarding their different efforts to mitigate use of these engines.
Thank you. And I had some questions. First of all, I know this goes towards mitigation, but I want to understand first, which are the new engines? Because I know Ms. Manwaring mentioned in her opening that, reminded us that, that the facility had purchased additional ones trying to keep within the 200 hours.
Yes, generator 3 and 4 are the engines that were purchased and installed in 2018, or excuse me, 2017.
And are all of them the same size with the same usage in terms of what you're using them for?
They are not, and if I may, I'd like to defer to Christopher Barch to answer those questions.
Board members, do you want to take witnesses out of order, or should I just hold my questions? I think for this, perhaps we'll just hold it for a minute. Let me see if I had any other questions. Because my questions are going to be on whether or not we're in imminent for risk of violation before we can be heard on a regular variance. But I think I might have had maybe another couple questions for this witness.
Ms. Prusak, if I
yes.
may, one of the questions the district will have for this witness is, are you able to prioritize the Tier 3 engines over the Tier 2 engines? Is that right? And if not, why can't you prioritize using the newer, cleaner running engines?
I'll have that question on the merits, but first I want to understand there's at least one that is not necessarily Genset 3 is at currently at 127.9. Let's go to the next witness, because the question I have is what is that one used for as opposed to the other ones, and is there an imminent chance of violation? Is violation imminent of the 200 hours for Genset 3, for example, if we don't grant this interim variance before it can be heard on regular variance, which would be April 9th? So that's sort of what I want to understand, the usage of these various engines. So if you can introduce the next witness, his name, spell his name, if you can spell your name, if you can indicate that you did take the oath. I know I saw you, but for the record, and also your title.
Christopher Barch, CHRISTOPHER, BARTSCH. I'm the Vice President of Tramway Systems for the Palm Springs Rail Tramway, and I did swear to tell the truth.
Okay, so let me try to take this one at a time. So what are the uses or the size and usage of each of these, and what's their purpose?
Generator 1 and 2 are 250 kVA, and generator 3 and 4 are 125 kVA. So the way they work, generator 1 powers a section of the building. Generator 1 and 2 are wired to the building in the same way. So, and generator 3 and 4 are wired the same. So we
Does that mean they're redundant of each other?
Those are, yes. So 1 and 2 are redundant, and 3 and 4 are redundant, but they don't work. So 1 and 2, either 1 or 2 has to run, and either 3 and 4 or 4 has to run to power the entire building.
Okay.
And it was sized that way because the way the wiring works, the smaller ones were usable for the location that they're used.
Okay. So in terms of, I'm noticing that while Genset 2 and Genset 4 are already over the 200 hours. Genset 1 is very close, and being one of the larger ones, let's just get that out of the way. You anticipate that before April 9th, that generator will be used enough to put it over the 200 hours, is that correct?
Yes, by switching them back and forth, trying to keep the hours as low as possible on each of them, that would either one goes over or two continues to go over.
Okay, and then in terms of Genset 3, it's currently at 127.9 hours. What do you anticipate its usage will be between now and when this could be heard for a regular variance on April 9th?
My intent would be to switch, again, the same thing, try and keep them both as low as possible. So since 4 is already over, it would be to switch to 3 to use it. And between now and then, we're looking at over a month, we'll definitely be over to the,
Okay,
even if the power is restored, the anticipated power restoration date is around the 15th of this month, so that's another week and a half or more away, so.
So you definitely, just to put it in perspective, so you anticipate that you will be in violation by April 9th?
Yes, that
For
is-
genset number 3?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And then the other question I had, between now, it was a little inconsistent in the petition. So in the petition, I understood, at one point, it was stated that the tramway is closed indefinitely. And then when looking at the harm, should we not grant an interim variance, it had to do with those who would be visiting the facility and not having it open. So the question I have is between now and April 9th, because that is, since we're in an interim variance, that's the relevant time we're looking at. So between now and April 9th, is the use of the generator that you need to just simply run it for the heat, for the necessary workings of your buildings? Is it to allow for construction? Can you just let us know essentially what you would not be able to do if you could not use those generators?
We would not have the fire suppression system that is required at the mountain station to keep everything obviously safe, whether people are there or not. It would also, depending on temperatures, turn the heating off, and we've already experienced, as Ms. De La Cruz pointed out, some freezing pipes when we tried to shut them off even during the day.
Okay, and also, do you need it in order to fix the roadway, the issues, the building?
Not the roadway at the Valley Station, but to run the tram itself. So if we need people up there too, there was damage to that building as well, some minor water damage due to the extensive amount of rain. So to operate the tram, some of the safety circuitry and systems built into the tram are located at the mountain station. They run off of a battery, but that battery is charged by a 480 volt that is run by the generator if we do not have house power.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Anyone else have questions either for Ms. De La Cruz or Mr. Barch, correct?
That's correct.
And please indicate for whom you have the question. Mr. Balagopalan.
I had a question for either one, but I'll ask Mr. Barch. Where are the engines located in reference to the mountain station?
They are at the mountain station to explain, as you enter the docking station when you come up in the tram. They are located to your right, just below the dock level. They're
So
just
they-
outside the building.
So when the floods came, they were,
Yeah, they're at the top station, so there was no
were at the
damage.
top.
Correct, yes.
so, okay, the damage, the flooding and all we saw was at the bottom?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I'm trying to, we maybe have I was trying to pull up a photo of where you saw the debris in the first video come down underneath the building. The way the Valley Station is built, it's a bridge that goes over that creek. The main lobby area is a bridge. The conduit that feeds power from the Valley Station up to the mountain runs underneath the building and then goes on power lines that are above ground to the top. That conduit is what was torn from the building, severing the power feed.
Okay. Now, in your petition, you said you operate in tandem, so you operate 1 and 3, or is that a sequence, 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, is that how you, or you can switch
It can
1 and
be-
4, or 2 and, 3?
That is correct. It can be either, but it has to be 1 or 2 and 3 or 4. So we can do it either way.
Either way, okay, so there's no order per se, depending on how much power you need or whatever the situation is. Now, you also operate a repeater station up there for the emergency response, so that's essential to keep that running too.
The repeater at the mountain station is used by search and rescue and other agencies, so they do rely on that. But is it required? It is something that is certainly a benefit to them, I would say. So part of going back to the earlier question was what happens if we're closed indefinitely, and what are some of the things that we need to be able to operate? We talked about fire suppression, fire monitoring, et cetera. But if we do and we are able to open again on April 1st, the needs for power become greater. We have wastewater treatment, power, heating, other power needs that would be needed and required in order for us to allow transport to the mountain station, which is in essence our sole purpose for existing in our statutory legislative language. Our purpose is to transport customers to the mountain station located at an elevation of 8,516 feet. So that's what we're talking currently about right now, is this high altitude remote location that is not accessible by roadway, and the only way to get to the mountain station is via tram car. So thank you.
So when the power is restored, hopefully April 1st, then the gensets will all just go back to routine maintenance and testing?
Correct, but the location of the power lines is one of the reasons we need the generators normally. With storms and things coming through, we do occasionally have outages due to that.
Right.
So we would need to use them, even though they weren't being used continually, they are there just as an emergency.
And typically, your testing and maintenance, how many hours do you run each engine, and once a month?
Testing is monthly, probably about 45 minutes to an hour a month, just to switch over to make sure they're running properly, yes.
Right, and it's for all the engines, each
Correct.
Engine, you do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
How are the records kept? Is it how do you know the hours and so forth? Do you have to have personnel go up there to take the readings, or is it transmitted electronically
No, personnel do go to the generator physically and
get the
yes.
get
take
the
the
readings? And so right now they are able to go because you have the genset, and with the battery backup, you're able to power the tramway and they can go up.
Correct. When the generators are running, then the power is, all the safety circuits are in place,
Okay,
and we can run the tram, yes.
all right, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for either Ms. De La Cruz or, Mr. Barch? Anyone else? Senator, did you have any questions? And I should just ask, Ms. Memory, because we did take Mr. Barch, will you have any questions after?
Not on good cause.
Okay, thank you. Senator.
At what point in time were the generators at 0, in terms of prior to 2004, February 14th?
I do not have the logs or the data that goes before February 10th, 2019, but I can show that on February 10th, 4 days prior to the flash flood, the generator 1 was at 0 hours, generator 2 was at 26.4, generator 3 was at 0 hours, and generator 4 was at 25.7.
Do I have a log? Do I have that log here?
That is listed on the chronology of events. It is the first attachment to the variance.
I'm looking.
So right after page 8 of 8 on the variance, the very next page is titled Palm Springs Aerial Tramway Rain Flash Flood
Senator, you're on the
Incident.
right page. It's
Yes,
the very top on the left-hand corner. That's
Oh, yes, okay,
that's
all
where Ms. De La Cruz just was reading from.
26.4, et cetera. and you alternate from generator to generator in order to guard against exceeding your 200 hours to the extent that you could.
That is correct.
And you're almost at 200 hours right now in some of them, and you're over and others.
Yes, one of our generators we believed to have been functioning properly, and it was discovered on the 18th that it was not. And so repairs were scheduled for one of the larger generators, the 250 kVA, for that Friday, February 22nd.
What number is that generator? 4, 3, or 4?
Generator 1,
Generator 1, okay.
so that was repaired on February 22nd, and we were able to switch from generator 2 to generator 1 and start utilizing the 200 hours for that specific engine.
What's the time limit for the 200 hours before you start it all over again?
It's a calendar year, so January 1st of 2020, it would start over again.
Oh, you could be way beyond that one.
Yes, sir. Hence our request for the interim and regular variants at a later date.
Just another question. Maybe it's on subject, but off subject. Who had the nerve to stand up there and photograph those?
Well, excuse me, luckily that video was from a surveillance camera, but I was physically very near that location when it happened, and it was very scary.
The building was like a yo-yo.
Yeah, it was bouncing around quite a bit.
Okay.
I assume everyone was okay. I mean, we saw some people standing also.
Yes. We were not open at that time and did not open that day, which is a very good thing. It happened when it did, and everyone is fine.
That's good to hear. Does anyone else have any questions for either of these witnesses? Thank you. Ms. Dela Cruz, is there anything else you wish to show or demonstrate on good cause?
No, I would just like to state that this is not something that is a normal or customary event. We are not prone to flash floods in our canyon. This is not anything that could have been reasonably predicted or anticipated. And we're just, again, very fortunate that no one was injured. While there has been damage to infrastructure and so forth, we're moving as diligently as we can to repair that, and we thank you for your consideration of our request.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll take that as a closing on good cause. I'm assuming, Ms. Manwaring, you have no, or do you have any witnesses for good cause?
No witnesses for good cause, and just a brief comment. Under other circumstances, 12 days between a flood and filing might counsel against supporting good cause in terms of prompt action, but given the location and how long it took to assess the engines, and the fact that only one engine was even close to the 200 hours when they did get there, I think there's no objection to their prompt action here, and we would not oppose a finding of good cause.
Thank you very much. Board members, anyone wish to begin discussion on good cause to proceed in absence of notice to the public? If not, I can do that. I think there's no question under the circumstances, as we all know, our good cause findings are not quite the same as the findings we make for the variance itself, and we say we like to make these findings and we have usual circumstances, but this is not a usual circumstance. I still think it was the diligence, well, let's just say, the only one I was concerned about was, which really wasn't a concern, I just really wanted to hear the different uses of the generators, and that it's a certainty that all four will be over the 200. And I believe, given that sometimes they have to be run for 24 hours in the colder weather to keep the heat on and pipes from freezing, I think that it's not difficult to make the first finding that two of them are already over the 200 hours. That is violation. The other two are in imminent, and certainly before this case could be heard on a regular variance. Certainly the circumstances that led to it could not have been reasonably avoided. We did hear testimony, a reminder that even though the Tramway has been before us in the past with regard to generators going over 200 hours, that in fact they did purchase 2 additional generators trying to guard against having to go over 200 hours, and that despite that, this issue caused something that could not be anticipated. This was Mother Nature. I mean, a video is worth, I would have to say, 1,000,000 words. That was quite frightening, and certainly, as Ms. De La Cruz stated, something that is not normally even anticipated. This is not in a flash flood area. Diligence in filing, again, I do believe, under the circumstances, and in particular, even though it occurred on February 14th, and probably if you look at the damage, you could reasonably assume we're going to be using these generators for a while. They were at a very low number, and especially 2 of them. And so by the time this was filed, I know it was filed by FedEx on a Friday. The district is closed until Tuesday. And so given that in between, and also given the fact that the hours hadn't quite gotten there, and everything they had to do to get that road accessible, et cetera, I think diligence is more than found in this case. And then we had some testimony with regard to if we were not to hear this and deny an interim variance today and instead wait until a noticed hearing on the 9th of April, there would be significant unreasonable adverse impact to petitioner in terms of not using those generators, not having use of the fire suppression system, heating for those freezing pipes, or running the tramway to make repairs, even though the repeater is not required. It's a benefit for search and rescue, et cetera. So for all those reasons, I find good cause to move forward with the hearing on the merits in absence of notice. Ms. Burr, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to agree with you, and being that Palm Springs is one of my neighbor cities for where I live, I've been lately, in the last month or so, we've been kidding about, we're expecting to see an arc coming down the street any moment. For the level, I mean, personally, I've seen the damage that's happening out in our area as a result of the floods and all the water that's coming down the road. So there's no doubt in my mind that there's good cause.
Anyone else wish to be heard on the good cause? Okay. Then I'll just make a motion in the matter of Mount San Jacinto Winter Park Authority doing business. What is it? Jacinto. Winter Park Authority doing business at Palm Springs Aerial Tramway, case number 5906-4. I move that we find good cause to hold a hearing on the merits of this interim variance in absence of notice to the public. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, everyone wants a second. Everyone agrees. Mr. Balagopalan has seconded. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, Senator, how do you vote? Dr. Lerner, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Byrd, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. So we will move on to the second phase of our hearing, which is the 6 findings that we need for a variance. And so much of the evidence and testimony that we would otherwise need to make those findings have already been taken in the good cause phase. And I assume, Ms. De La Cruz, you would like to incorporate that into the hearing on the merits. Is that correct?
Yes, please.
And Ms. Manwaring, any objection?
No objection.
Okay. Then we will incorporate all of that testimony, all of the evidence. And Ms. De La Cruz, would you like to give an opening on the 6 findings? You may waive it or you may give it, whatever you prefer.
I'll waive it, as I hope that I have captured most of that in my opening, but I'm certainly open to questions.
Yes, and we will come back because there's a few issues we'll have to get evidence on. And Ms. Manwaring, any opening?
We'll waive opening for the regular.
Okay. Ms. De La Cruz, let's see. Would you like to, or have you, are you prepared to give any testimony on excess emissions, which would mean the emissions profile essentially of your gen sets, because any operation of them over the 200 hours is considered excess emissions. Do you have a witness to present on that? If not, I don't know if the district is prepared for that.
We do not have a witness to present information on. We did work closely with AQMD staff related to the emissions calculations for what we anticipate may be the excess hours during the interim variance. We believe at the time of filing that we may have 200 hours per generator. And so we have calculated what those emissions in pounds per hour would be.
And so before we move on then to the district for any witness on excess emissions, perhaps either you or if you can introduce another witness who can discuss how, if at all, you would be able to minimize those excess emissions, the use of any of the gen sets, and perhaps as alluded to by Ms. Manwaring, discuss the various cleanliness, so to say, the emissions profiles of the newer versus the older, and preferential treatment of the usage of one over another. Do you have a witness who might be able to discuss that?
Yes, I do. I'd like to defer to Christopher Barch for that testimony, please.
Okay, Mr. Barch, you don't have to introduce yourself over. We have your spelling, and you're still under oath. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The only thing, excuse me, as I have to stand on that is, as I stated before, the generators have to be run in tandem, 1 or 2 and 3 or 4, so 1 and 3, 2 and 4, 1 and 4, 2 and 3. We cannot use the newer, higher tiered generators only. We have to use the lower tiered as well. So if that was the question about whether we could mitigate some of the pollution by using the cleaner running engines, we are not able to do that and still power the entire building.
Do you have anything else that you'd like to add before I move it to questions?
I do not.
Okay. Ms. Manwaring, questions for Mr. Barch?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Barch again. Referring to the petition, page 5 through 6, question 19, where estimated excess emissions are calculated.
Okay.
Are you familiar with these calculations, and did you participate in preparing this?
I did not, no. And
Okay.
not very-
Ms. De La Cruz, should I ask you about preparing this with Mr. Hamong's assistance?
Yes.
Okay, no problem. I think that you just provided the information that I wanted to elicit, but just to be clear, did the district ask whether or not the facility could prioritize running the Cummins engine, which are the Genset 3 and 4, the newer engines? Did we ask that of you?
Yes.
All right. And for the record, it's Ms. De La Cruz who's responding. And again, that's because the Volvos, number 1 and number 2, are larger, and it's essential that at least one of those be operating at all times?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. So you're not able to mitigate excess emissions that way based on operations, and you've attempted to mitigate excess emissions by limiting operations from 6 to 6. Is there anything else that you have considered or are able to consider to reduce excess emissions of these engines?
We had considered maybe an additional generator, like a rental, but due to the location and no roadway access to the mountain station, that is not an option.
Okay. No more questions for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Barch, would that possibly, I know this is not really relevant to the interim variance, but just out of curiosity, would that be an option, meaning bringing in another generator for the regular variance when that should come up?
No, I didn't look very closely at it, but the size of our current generators, if we wanted to bring something into comparison to that, again, there's no real physical way anywhere to put it even, so we could run it and power the building as a temporary type of situation.
Ms. De La Cruz, maybe this is for you to answer. I'm looking at that page 5, item number 19, the excess emissions. Do you know, is the top one, are those engines 1 and 2, and the bottom are engines 3 and 4?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Any other questions for either witness? Yes, Mr. Balago-Polin.
Ms. Dela Cruz, where did you get these factors for calculating excess emissions?
I worked with Mr. Desai from the district to come up with the calculations and then did the computations on my own once I had what the pounds per hour were and calculated out what is the number of days that we were ultimately looking for related to the variance period, and then I did the calculations based off of that information.
Did you ask Mr. Desai why he didn't give you any factors for the sulfur dioxide emissions? Because the sulfur fuel that has been used, the sulfur content in the diesel, it's showing 0 right now as far as the emissions of sulfur dioxide. And you're using diesel fuel with the 15 ppm sulfur content, so there will be some sulfur dioxide emissions. Do you know why you have 0 for both of them?
I do not know. I'm sorry.
We can ask. Okay. Thank you. Oh, one other. How do you take diesel up? I mean, you have to take diesel up to the, and you use. How are you managing that? Taking the fuel
Yeah, we transport it in 55-gallon barrels on the tram car.
on the tram car. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for either of the witnesses?
Ms. Prusek, I apologize. I will have one more line of questions on Exhibit 1. I wasn't sure which witness to ask.
Okay, but you may, I don't see, unless anyone else had any other
On
questions.
Exhibit 1, which are your engine logs, I'm seeing what I assume may be typos, so I'd like to ask you, on page 3, when we're talking about Genset 3, the information in the upper left corner, I'm assuming the year of manufacture is 2017, not 2107?
That is correct.
All right,
Thank you.
and I'm not being facetious. It's actually the number below that my diligent permitting engineer pointed out to me. You have a rated brake horsepower of 1,467. That number surprises us, and we think that that may be a different number. Would you like a moment to let us know if that's the right number or if there's a different number that should be there? And the same questions on Genset 4.
Yes, if we may confer for just a moment, please. Thank you.
So even if they did the 400 hours, it's still down less than 2 pounds per.
Thank you for that opportunity. We would like to make a correction, please, to the rating listed. As indicated in our permit, and which is a true reflection of it, it's 324 bhp. That is for Genset 3 and 4.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that correction, and thank you, Mr. Desai, for pointing that out. Now, just briefly on the calculations, I don't think this is essential to get to the findings, but it was a little confusing when I first read this. So when you broke down your estimates, and I understand that Mr. Desai helped you with the factors and the numerical values, but it looks like you calculated for 200 hours for 3 months, and then 200 hours for 6 months. Could you help us understand your thinking there? And are you actually looking for an additional 400 hours, or are these just estimates of what you think you might need?
These are estimates of what we think we might need. At the time of filing, because we were unsure of when the electrical line would be replaced, and in also understanding where we were based on the hours and the anticipated usage, we felt that the 200 hours in addition may be needed as a practical estimate until power could be restored. And then relying upon historical data and the remote location and the fact that we are responsible for servicing the power lines at our facility that provide house power to the mountain station, in looking at previous weather-related events that have led us to be here before you in the past. The 200 hours that we are requesting beyond the interim variance 200 hours is in anticipation of potential weather-related storms that we may experience as we progress through the year. So yes, it is an estimate, though.
I've looked at prior petitions, including the conditions when these variances were granted, and I have not seen that we put an upper hour limit. So I was just curious as to whether or not they were asking for an hour limit. One other question regarding the petition. Could you look at question 24 on page 7? Just want to offer you an opportunity to correct and clarify your final compliance deadline. January 1st, 2019 is passed. Would you agree that that date should be January 1st, 2020?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
All right, with those corrections, we have no further questions for these witnesses.
Okay, Senator, do you have questions?
Yeah, yes. I was going to raise the question about 24 as well. When is the expected date to be completed? I think
The testimony the district has heard is repairs mid-March, reopening April 1st, but as a question of law, the hours kick over again on January 1st. So their 200 hours resets January 1st of every year.
2020.
Correct.
Okay, fine.
Any other questions? Okay. We're going to take a quick break. Let's take a 15-minute break. Oh, let me ask first. Ms. Memering, are you planning to introduce any witnesses?
It was not our intention, but I believe there's some questions that the engineer can help with here, so we will introduce Mr. Hamang Desai when we proceed.
Okay, you know what? Let's go ahead and proceed.
I think it'll be brief.
Yes, please. If you want to introduce your witness, please.
Mr. Desai, could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Hi, my name is Hamang, Hemang, last name Desai.
Right. And are you the permitting engineer assigned to this facility?
Yes, I am.
And did you review the petition?
Yes, I did.
And you heard Ms. De La Cruz testify that it was with your assistance that she calculated the excess emissions. Is that accurate to say?
Yes,
And you provided her with the factors to use?
I did.
All right. One question in anticipation of Mr. Balagopalan's question. A value of 0 was used for SOx excess emissions. Could you please describe why you advised Ms. De La Cruz to use that emission factor?
That factor was negligible because we use at the 500 ppm diesel, which is the low sulfur diesel. The conversion is about 0.0049 grams per bhp hour, and if you do, and with the 394 horsepower engine, the hourly would be 0.004 pounds per hour, and for the 324-hour engine, it would be 0.0035 pounds per hour. So even if you go 200 hours, excess, the amount would be about 2 pounds of total SOx.
So it's your testimony that you advised Ms. De La Cruz based on the amount being negligible in your opinion?
Correct.
Right. And you did review the other calculations that were in the petition?
I did.
And they seem reasonable?
Yes.
No other questions for this witness?
yeah.
Wait, Ms. De La Cruz, do you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Balagopalan.
So, Mr. Desai, so you mentioned total about 2 pounds a year based on 200 hours. So that's per engine, right?
Right.
And so the total could be more than 10 pounds for the duration.
Right.
So don't you? We had the same situation going with the prior, where the engineer came back and gave a number of SOx emission that's almost equal to the VOC emission factor, and it was a smaller engine. So I always hate to see 0 when we know there is emission, albeit it's a very small number. I don't think you could provide maybe during the break a number that is appropriate, because we know it's not 0, and you testified as 0.00 the number. So could we get a accurate the number after the break? That can be, so that they can calculate the correct amount of sulfur dioxide emission. Even though it'll probably not be less than the minimum fee due, but just for being accurate and, to reflect that there are sulfur dioxide emissions coming from the diesel fuel.
Sure.
And it's not zero.
Sure.
I might argue that that's not essential to the findings, but absolutely, we can provide those numbers to Ms. De La Cruz, who, if then she chooses to revise the petition to add those numbers, that would be a request to the facility. But I'm sure Mr. Hamon will help with the math during a break.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
Then do we wish to take a break before deliberation? Is that?
It sounds like a request is being made of the district, which we're happy to comply with if it's necessary.
And it's necessary to your findings? Okay. So does anyone have any other questions then at this time for Mr. Desai? Okay, seeing none, and we will have no other witnesses. Okay.
We have a compliance inspector here in the audience, but as you've heard, it's not accessible. We have not been to the site to inspect the engine since the flood.
You don't want to take a boat ride.
We'd love a helicopter ride, but, district resources.
It's good to hear. Okay, so then let us take a break, and then we will come back with what Mr. Balagopalan has asked for, and we'll take closing statements, and then we will deliberate and make a motion. Okay, thank you. We're off the record until, let's just say, 10:20. That'll give plenty of time, correct? 10:20? Okay, 10:20. So we're off the record.
Okay, for 1 and 2, if they use this factor, they would get .08. What's my unit? Pounds per hour?
For the entire 200.
Oh, that's for 200. Okay.
Okay, we're back on the record. I know that the parties were consulting or recalculating. And Ms. Manwaring, if you have some additional information for us, please.
I'd like to recall Mr. Desai for a couple questions. Mr. Desai, during the break, did you provide some numbers to Ms. De La Cruz to more accurately reflect sulfur emissions from these engines?
I did.
All right. And is there anything else about your testimony that you'd like to clarify?
I stated 500 ppm sulfur, but in reality is 15 ppm sulfur for the ultra-low diesel. But the numbers are still the same.
All right. I think the next question is probably best directed to the facility. I'm
Okay.
sorry, excuse me. I have no other questions for this witness. In terms of modifying the petition, that's a facility question, but I didn't mean to cut off Mr. Balagopan if he has more questions.
Did you have other questions? Okay, Ms. De La Cruz, do you have any questions on that testimony?
We do not.
Okay.
So, Mr. Desai, what is the number now? Per pound per hour, if you,
For the engine 1 and 2, which are rated at 394 horsepower, the hourly emissions from that engine is, per engine is 0.004 pounds per hour. Pardon me? 0.004 pounds per hour per engine. And then for the two 324 horsepower engine, the number is 0.0035 pounds per hour per engine.
and the 15 ppm is reflected on two of the permit conditions, and two of the permits I see, is that correct? Both.
I believe it, yeah, on one of them it is, and then I believe on the second one it says Rule 431.2.
So, yeah.
On the Volvo engines, it's reflected in the applicable requirements of Rule 431.2.
Which requires the 15 ppm.
15 ppm, correct.
Had another question, and this is regarding PM, and I should have asked that before, because you have, Ms. De La Cruz has provided in the petition both PM and PM10 emissions, and there is a disconnect between the two also. Now, what are they supposed to, do you know what are they supposed to report as far as excess emission, PM or PM10 or PM?
I believe it's PM10.
PM10. So, so when they, can we look at page 5 of the petition?
Okay.
You look at PM and PM10 emissions. The PM10 emission, let me ask this question, the more general, is the PM10 emission a subset of the PM emissions?
Yes,
So it should be a fraction thereof of the PM.
correct.
And so in the, for engines 1 and 2, it's showing the opposite, and then, but in engine 3 and 4, it is showing, correctly.
Right. The engine 1 and 2, usually we consider PM10 is like 96% of the PM emissions. So clearly 1 and 2 are incorrect for the PM.
So if you can restate what they should be reporting as far as for PM10 for engines 1 and 2 and for engines 3 and 4.
The PM is correct. The PM10 hourly is correct. However, the PM should be 0.08 pounds per hour.
PM is 0.0, okay.
For all four? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4?
No, for the 3 and 4, PM10, there's an extra 0 after the decimal. So it should be 0.0, PM10 should be 0.0576 instead of 0.00576.
Okay, thanks. So just to clarify, so what the facility has to report is based on PM10?
Correct.
Right, okay. All right, thank you for that correction.
Sure.
No further questions.
Anyone else have any questions on Mr. Desai's additional testimony? Okay. Ms. Manwaring, did you say you had additional questions for the facility?
I do not. I think that whether or not the facility wants to modify their petition to reflect more accurately the SOx emissions, that would be a question for them.
I'm not sure if they need to. I think that we have the record stating it more precisely, but would you wish to amend? There were a couple of, I guess, mistakes as well, to reflect Mr. Desai's testimony.
We wish the record to reflect the corrections as stated by Mr. Desai, please.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any other testimony we wish to have? Okay, seeing none. Ms. De La Cruz, would you like to make a closing statement on the interim variance?
We'd like to thank the board for your time and consideration today. As you know, this is something that no one could ever truly be prepared for, and we are doing everything we can to ensure that we are not utilizing emergency power as soon as is possible. As a public agency, we take very seriously our responsibility, not only to public safety, as far as transportation and so forth related to our tram cars, but in overall compliance, whether it be air quality and a variety of other industries, if you will. At this time, we would request that the board provide clarification, please, on two matters. Number one, what is the period of time that the fees would be calculated that the board requests? Is this during, at the end of the interim variance, and if so, through what date? As stated in the conditions that is being proposed, it states that these fees are due by April 9th. Is that the board's desire? Or should it be calculated all at the end of the year? And also number two, we would request the board if you would be willing to waive the excess emission fees during the interim variance period, or perhaps come up with another alternative during that period of time.
If you wish us to waive the excess emission fees or come up with an alternative, can you make an argument as to why you wish us to waive those fees? Generally, it's if they are hold on. I think it's if they propose an unreasonable burden or they are otherwise inequitable. But let me get exactly what it would be under 303M of district rules, and I'll just read it once I find it. Okay. It's there before. It's there too. Okay, 303M, our discretionary powers, and I'll just read it. Any person may allege that payment of any of the fees within this rule, excluding publication fees, will cause an unreasonable hardship or is otherwise inequitable. So if you can make just a statement as to one of those and why you think it falls within.
Perhaps the board would be willing to consider, rather than charging the minimum fee during this period of time, the approximately $200 per day, that the fees during the variance period would be based on actual hours used during this period of time. While we are closed and anticipate hopefully opening on April 1st, we are certainly experiencing a loss of revenue for each day, and we have also waived the commission fees from the concessionaires that we are in contract with. We continue to maintain the salaries of our employees during this month of March to avoid excess hardship to them and mass layoffs and so forth. So if it is not reasonable to the board to waive the fees, we would ask that consideration be made for providing a payment based on actual usage rather than the minimums per day as required in the variance, please.
And can you remind the board, I believe there was testimony with regard to the fact that even though you're trying on certain days to minimize the number of hours, are these generators continuing to be used every day in some capacity?
Yes, they are, all four. or excuse me, 2 at a time operating in tandem.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Manwaring, you're closing.
The district has no objection to the granting of the variance as requested and does not take a position on excess emission fees.
Thank you. And we'll take up the issue of excess emission fees after we take up the issue of the interim variance itself. And I'll answer the first question you had in a moment. But first, board members, I believe that we can make all the findings for a variance as we made all the findings for good cause. Certainly, number one, we already discussed as a matter of good cause, either these 4 gensets are over the 200 hours allowed by permit, or they will be during the pendency of the interim variance, which would go for 90 days or more likely until it can be heard for regular variance, which would be currently scheduled for April 9th. Conditions are beyond the reasonable control of petitioner. We viewed a rather shocking video, and obviously it's Mother Nature, and it's despite the fact that this facility has been before us on other occasions in other years and has attempted to provide additional generators and backup power, but still find themselves in this situation. I believe it would be an arbitrary, unreasonable taking of property to not allow for the generators to run, and that's because of the reasons we mentioned during the good cause phase. These generators need to be used for fire suppression. They need to be used to keep the heat on, to not allow for those pipes to freeze, and also for the running of the tramway to make repairs. And without it, those things could not occur, and that would be an unreasonable taking of property. Closing or taking that we just discussed would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. Again, we have the excess emissions. They are whatever the emissions profile is of each generator as they are run, because, well, except for 2 of them are not quite over the 200 hours. So if those are run, they will not be in violation of any rules until those generators are actually over the 200 hours. And so I would think that the facility will attempt to use those generators first, because excess emission fees, excess emissions, all of that will not be technically generated until they are over the 200 hours. But regardless, in terms of our weighing and balancing, seeing the excess emissions as they are calculated on a per hour basis on page 6 of the petition, I don't believe that outweighs the need for them for all these emergency reasons. Consideration, we heard, has been given to curtailing operations. We did hear from Ms. De La Cruz, I think in particular, that they are attempting, when possible, when the weather permits, not to run generators, a generator or 2 generators in tandem for 24 hours at a time. However, they can only do that as weather is permitting, and they're doing the best of their ability to do that. Reducing excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible, we heard it is not possible to run the cleaner engines. One cleaner engine needs to be run with one of the older engines, but to the extent that they are minimizing the hours they are run, they will do so. And monitoring will be taken care of by the proposed conditions. Anyone else have any thoughts? Ms. Bird?
I agree that we can make the findings. I just wanted to just add that this facility has been trying to be as compliant as possible. We saw that over the last few years when they came in, when the weather was bad and their generators went over to the point where they actually, with the the rules as they were then, they added some generators in an effort to not have to come back to us, which is unfortunate that you had to come back anyway, but they added generators in order to come back to us. So the weather has been quite unusual this year, and I believe that we can make all the findings.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Mr. Balagopalan?
No, I agree, and I think in addition, I'll just, I think it's in the petition that there's a repeater there that is also, is provided power from this station. I think that's critical for rescue, fire rescue. You never know when that happens, so I think that's, and we have seen actually, the county San Bernardino come in specifically because of the power, loss of power to the microwave unit for the repeater to work in case of emergency response. So I think for all that reasons which you cited for heating power, wastewater treatment and so forth, I think also providing power to the repeater is also essential. So I think we need to grant the variance. And I think we can find the reasons for doing that. Thank you.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Senator?
Any attempt to find an alternative method of saving hours, for an example. In the petition, it was stated that they ceased operation between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., only to discover that the pipes were frozen, and they left no alternative but to operate the generators once again in order to avoid that major problem of frozen pipes, which cause additional problem. So, of course, a variance is necessary, and for them to minimize the negative effect that would be imposed on the entire operation of the system. So I agree.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just in answer to Ms. De La Cruz's first question during her closing, board members, I think when we look at the interim variance conditions as proposed on Exhibit A, as we have been doing with interim variances of similar nature, where we are dealing with a generator, we have the date for excess emissions for the interim as April 9th, 2019, because that is the date of the regular variance. Whether or not we waive all or a part of, we will take up after. But does anyone have any issues with that date? I think that sums up closes the interim variance, and then we move on to the regular variance. Does anyone have any thoughts? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yeah, on condition number one, I believe in the past, in other conditions, we have limited the operation of the engine for maintenance and testing to 1 hour a month. You know, I know it's kind of open-ended here, but it says to emergency use, which we are going to allow, plus needed time for repairs in the event of breakdown, and time needed for compliance with other regulatory requirements. I think looking at the permit actually allows up to a couple of the permits, the newer ones for testing and maintenance up to 2 hours, 4.2 hours in 1 month. So maybe we want to, as far as the mitigation, limited to for 1 hour a month for testing, and we heard testimony that they take about 45 minutes to do the testing and the maintenance. So as part of a mitigation, you know, not to go up to 4.2 hours, but to limit each of the engines for testing and maintenance to 1 hour a month.
I would be hesitant to do that without the board agreeing to reopen the hearing and hearing from the petitioner with regard to what they believe is the proper amount or necessary maintenance. And I would be willing to reopen the record for that limited question,
Okay.
if that makes
Yes.
sense. And do we have a third member who would be willing to open? Okay, so that's 3 members who are willing to reopen for that limited question. And I don't know, Ms. De La Cruz or Mr. Barch, who would want to answer, but the question essentially is it possible or is it safe to limit the maintenance to less than 4 hours to some amount per month?
The general practice is the generator is tested once a week, we definitely can limit that to once a month. That does just factor in, we also need to factor in our service, which is provided sometime in the summer by an outside company, and they need to run it for that. So that would potentially go over that 1 hour a month if we tested it and also had to service it, because he needs to run it during the service.
Yes, Ms. Byrd had.
I was just going to make a recommendation, since this is only for the interim and since interim variance, and since they don't really know what's going to happen, I was good with having it open-ended for this interim variance, with the idea that maybe when we do the regular variance, we can pin it down better. I don't know.
Before we close, are there any other questions? Were you indicating, Ms. Memory, that you had a question or a thought?
If I may just opine on that subject, since we have reopened it for a limited purpose, the district certainly considered that, and if you'd like us to bring that back when we come back for the regular on April 9th, we can certainly do so. In the past, the facilities agreed to 0.7, and that took into account exercising the engines, and there was a conversation about whether or not, because they've run so much, is it even necessary to exercise these engines? So it was my choice to word this the way it is. If it's your direction to come back with a limitation on in the time for the regular hearing, we can certainly do that. I would ask the facility between now and then whether or not exercising the engines is necessary, given that they've run so much, and whether or not they could live with the 0.7 per month for maintenance that they have done so in the past, if that would please the board.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I'm going to close the testimony, then we can continue the discussion. Any other questions on that limited? Okay, we are closing the record then. Mr. Balagopalan, what do you?
No, I'm okay with what Ms. Manwaring stated, coming back at the regular variance, have a better idea on how many hours they need to run it for testing. And I guess the service is the thing that was not factored in here, but that's why probably, you have 4.2, but I was just suggesting maybe when you come back, as far as a mitigation, that because you've exceeded 200 hours to limit it to an hour a month, except maybe during the period when you're doing the other, the service hours. But then you maybe wording it so that during service period, you can go up to 4.2, but otherwise, non-service months, you'd limit it to 1 hour per month for testing per engine. But we can do that during the regular variance.
That makes a lot of sense. We have just a month before that, that next hearing. Anyone else have any thoughts before a motion? Okay, then I'm going to make a motion. In the matter of Mount San Jacinto Winter Park Authority, doing business as Palm Springs Aerial Tramway, case number 5906-4, I move that we grant the interim variance, which would start today and would last for 90 days, or until this matter can be heard for a regular variance, which is currently scheduled for April 9th, 2019, whichever comes first. And it would be for the facility at 1 Tramway Road in Palm Springs. And it would include all 4 internal combustion engines, which are listed on page 2 of the petition, item number 6. And further would be from District Rule 203B, permit condition number 3 for each of the engines with regard to exceedance of the 200-hour in any 1-year limitation. Yes. Oh, sorry. Condition 3 for engines 1 and 2. Thank you for that. So permit condition number 3 for engines 1 and 2, and 4 for engines number 3 and 4. All having to do with that 200-hour limitation on usage in any 1 year. I further move that we adopt the proposed interim variance conditions as they read in Exhibit A with no changes. And excess emissions are whenever the engines are operated in exceedance of the 200 hours. So just to be clear, for 2 of the engines, they are not yet in excess of the 200 hours, so excess emissions would not apply until those engines are over the 200 hours for those 2 engines. Those are engines, no, they are engines 1 and 3? Engines 1 and 3. But once 1 and 3 is over the 200 hours, every use per hour is excess emissions, and whenever during the interim variance period, engines 2 and 4 are operated, per hour will be excess emissions generated, and those excess emissions are for engines 1 and 2, VOCs, well, they're to be determined, but they are essentially 0.17 pounds per hour VOC, 3.56 pounds per hour NOx. I'm going to go out one more decimal point, 0.004 pounds per hour SOx, 0.78 pounds per hour CO, 0.08 pounds per hour PM, but more relevant, PM10, 0.07 pounds per hour. For engines 3 and 4, it would be 0.08 pounds per hour VOC, 2.06 pounds per hour NOx, 0.003 pounds per hour SOx, 0.53 pounds per hour CO, PM 0.06 pounds per hour, and PM 10, 0.056. We're going to do it. 0.06 pounds per hour, PM 10. And that completes my motion. Is there a second? Ms. Byrd. Ms. Byrd seconds the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Senator, how do you vote? Dr. Lerner, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Byrd votes. Yes. And I vote yes. That means motion passes 5-0. We have a second motion to consider, and that is the request by the petitioner to either waive in whole or in part the excess emission fees. So that would, again, I'm going to reread it since we're taking it up now. That is under Rule 303, District Rule 303M, our discretionary powers, which allow us to either adjust, meaning to either waive all or a portion of the excess emission fees for an unreasonable hardship or otherwise inequitable. And I believe the argument made was under unreasonable hardship. And I can begin with my thoughts. I did a quick calculation. We're talking just during the interim variance period, and I only did it for 30 days, using the excess emission fee. So any day where one of the generators that is in excess of the 200-hour limitation is run. Now, of course, there are 2 that are not over the 200, but they would soon be under the 200 hours. So for most of that 30 days, they would run the risk of minimum excess emission fees of $192.36, and that would put them well over $5,000 just for the interim variance period. And in her argument, Ms. De La Cruz cited that because they are closed and because they are making all of these, the outlay of money for the repairs, they have a loss of revenue. They are still paying. They're trying to still pay the over 100 members of staff that are working at the facility. I believe at one of the more recent hearings, Ms. Byrd, you had suggested or recommended. I believe we should not waive them entirely, but I think they should be done instead of the minimum, they should be done on a per ton basis, which I think would be significantly lower. I haven't done the calculation. That's my thoughts. I would like to hear from other members of the board. Anyone else wish? Ms. Byrd and then Mr. Balagopalan.
Under the circumstances, I would be willing as well to have the emissions fees just be calculated on the per ton. And part of that is this is also a government agency. And as you said, they're losing revenue. They still have to pay staff. They've waived fees for vendors. And so they are, in addition to all of the repairs that have to be done on those roads and the equipment that has to be put into place, I think that it would be reasonable, as you said, to have them just be, have the fees reflect the actual emissions based on tonnage.
Before we hear from you, Mr. Balagopalan, do you know just, or should we go off the record? I'd like to have an idea of the magnitude of what we're talking about if we do it on a per ton basis, assuming that one of the engines 1 and 2 would have to be run each day, and one of the engines 3 and 4 would have to be run each day. And perhaps if we go off the record, I don't know if anybody could make that kind of calculation. I don't know if you have an idea.
I mean, I think the engineer can easily do that.
Okay, I would like to open the record for that calculation or that ballpark, and I'd like to see if we have 2 other members who are willing to hear that number.
But, yeah, and I think they have to use the dollar per ton, look up the dollar per ton value in the Rule 304 and then calculate based on that.
I just want to make sure that we're making a good decision, not to just waive them all together. So I want to have an idea of what we're talking about.
We just want some clarification on the request. If you could give us some, Mr. Desai has offered to calculate that based on the total 200 hours, or are you looking for something per hour, per day? What would make the most sense in order to deliberate?
Well, let me ask you, Ms. De La Cruz, the 200 hours, was that during the interim variance period that it was assumed, or was that for the, was that not for the entire year?
That's for the interim variance
Okay.
period.
I think that makes the most sense, since that's what's anticipated. Do my fellow board members agree? Yeah, that makes the most sense. That's the most helpful. So should we go off the record and allow that?
I would like to give the engineer some time off the record to do the math.
Please. Let's give Mr. Desai, we'll go off the record and give Mr. Desai as much time as he needs. We're off the record.
And Mr. Desai, if I was going to, do you need the rule to look at what the fee rate is for the different pollutants? Okay.
Okay, we are off the record.
I got it.
Yeah, absolutely. Take the whole pad. You do the math and I'll do the per ton, because it's all the different pollutants.
So let's start with the 394 horsepower.
Okay, for VOC, 0.017 tons per what period? Okay.
So this is.
What am I gonna do? I'm gonna go to sleep. I'm gonna take a nap. It's 2 hours.
This is Pam. Right. Okay, so now we have that now down for that. So it's this amount of money for 2,000 gallons. You want to go down to tons. Okay, all right, so let's. Okay, so. Yep, so do you have a calculator there? It's, let's do 0.17 times 6,073. That's the dollar, 6,000.
Are we back on?
Oh, this is for the whole 200? Yeah. Okay, got it.
We're not breaking for lunch, are we? Yeah.
Okay, we're back on the record, and we had reopened the record for the, again, the limited issue of what, at least a ballpark, of what we anticipate if those fees are to be paid per ton as opposed to a minimum.
All right, thank you. I'm going to report on engines 1 and 2, which are the Volvos, which are the larger engines first. And please forgive us, although Mr. Desai is perfectly capable of math. He had a lawyer here helping him. So any mistakes in calculations, I'm just going to take responsibility for. If they use the entire 200 hours during the interim for VOCs, they would be responsible for about $103.
For each.
Thank you, Senator. For each engine, yes. So if they went over 200 hours on both engines, it would be about $206.
I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
those are not run together, are they?
Exactly. So, yes. If either 1 or 2 used all of 200 hours, the VOC excess emission fee would be $103. For NOx, $1,297. For CO, about $4. For SOx, about $16. Oh, I'm sorry. No. For SOx, $1.60. And for PM, the rule just specifies particulate matter. It doesn't differentiate between PM and PM10 here. We got about $34. And now we can do it for 3 and 4. These numbers are all going to be slightly smaller. For VOC, $42. For NOx, $750. For CO, $3.15. For PM, about $25. And for SOx, about $1.50.
Thank you. Any, any other either questions or testimony on that particular issue? Okay, I'm going to close the record then again. I just wanted to do some calculations myself. Okay, so board members, unless my math, because I too am a lawyer, is wrong, that would be a total of, if they used these engines for the 200 additional hours anticipated, would be $2,262 or so. And so the 2005, you got? Okay, so somewhere in the range of $2,200 to $2,500. So the question now becomes, for our deliberation and discussion, is whether we feel that that itself falls within 303, excuse me, and which I don't have up anymore, but 303, the unreasonable hardship. And I would really like to hear what others think. This is, the interim variance is during the period with a lot of outlays and not a lot of income. We already did that one, yes. Thank you, though. Is during the period with not a lot of income or any income and a lot of outlays. And I wonder, board members, if we want to consider waiving excess emission fees during the interim period until at least we hear in the regular variance that the regular electricity is up and running, and then we would make a different decision moving forward if the regular variance is granted as to fees for the rest of the year. So just to sum that up, that does seem like a hardship during a period with trying to keep afloat, having a lot of outlays and no income. and perhaps waiving those fees just until the regular variance could be heard. Senator?
I support waiving the fees, and these are a set of unfortunate sets of circumstances imposed on the Palm Springs area tramway. For example, the cost of getting the system up and running again is not yet determined, but it will be quite expensive. Number one. Number two is that they have a $5 million outstanding bond indebtedness. It will still have to be paid even during this period of time. That's quite significant. You have they would lose roughly $50,000 a day. Gee. So when that's added up, what it could have been or should have been, is not available to pay down the debt or meet its obligations. That's another reason we should give them some consideration. Even when there's an operation, the funding comes from selling tickets only. And that's a real hardship that's been imposed due to a set of unfortunate sets of circumstances. The catastrophe took place, and I would support waiving the fees during that time period.
Well stated. Anyone else have any thoughts? God. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Balagopalan.
No, I'm okay. It's just that when we had the county come here and they asked for relief, we had them pay based on actual emission, the county of San Bernardino. And my question, and I think it's written here, it is a public agency, public corporation of the state of California. So there's, but I'm wondering, to be equitable, and we should at least consider charging based on actual emissions instead of the minimum fee.
The question, though, the argument made was not that it was otherwise inequitable. And I think we do take, my position is we take everything on a case by case. And in this case, the unreasonable hardship is all the more, given that there is no income, that the salaries are still being paid, that they are, I know the senator mentioned the indebtedness, that they are trying to keep afloat and make costly repairs at the same time. My thought is just that to waive fees during the interim period would allow for the possibility that when they come for the regular variance, that power is restored. At that point, possibly, they might be in a position to start bringing income in. I don't know where they'll be, but I think that the motion I would make would be to waive the fees for the interim and see where we are at the regular.
No, I'm okay with that. I just wanted to bring up, the previous case, that's all.
And I agree. We should be applying our criteria consistently, but I think we are. It's just that the facts are a bit different here.
Okay.
My question is, are you considering the unreasonableness, just the event itself? Because $2,500 for more than 30 days, in my opinion, is not unreasonable.
Personally, I'm considering both the unreasonableness to relate to the natural, it was due to a flood. It had nothing to do with the control of the facility, but also unreasonable attached to hardship in consideration with the fact that there is no income during this period and in relation to the other expenses that are needing to be carried, including, I think, salaries are very important. And they themselves, the facility themselves, are waiving fees from those who are
Vendors.
And so I believe that given the circumstances they themselves have found, it would be unreasonable to require those fees during this time, and for similar reasons. I think we should find that for the facility itself.
Okay.
If there's nothing else, I'm going to make a motion then. I'm sorry,
And
Senator.
making a motion, which I should include 137 employees will still be receiving a paycheck.
I'm just going to make that is in the deliberation, absolutely, and in the thoughts. And based on all of that, I move that in the matter of Mount San Jacinto Winter Park Authority doing business as Palm Springs Aerial Tramway, case number 5906-4, that we waive all excess emission fees for the interim variance period, based on the hardship, based on the unreasonable nature of what occurred, the unreasonable nature of those fees in relation to the fact that this facility is making no money and yet still holding that staff, paying that staff salaries, having other very significant payments for repairs, et cetera, and that in these, under those specific facts, I can find it. It is for the interim variance unreasonable, an unreasonable hardship. And so my motion is to waive the fees for the interim variance. Is there a second?
Second.
Senator has seconded. Any discussion on that motion? Ms. Byrd?
I just wanted to be clear that when the facility does come back, that they may have to experience excess emission fees if there are any in the regular variance. Is that correct?
That is correct. So my motion is limited to the interim variance fees between now and April 9th, or until this case can be heard. Any other discussion on that motion? Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Byrd, how do you vote?
Yes.
Dr. Lerner, how do you vote?
Yes.
Senator, you vote?
Aye.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. I'm going to adjourn the regular hearing, and I'd like to adjourn this regular hearing in memory, if I could have a moment, in the memory of Dr. Clifford Lee, who served a term on this board and who I understand recently passed. So it is in his memory we adjourn this regular meeting. And have a moment. And we will take about 10 minutes, and we'll be back at 11:30 for our regular meeting, general meeting, and that will be in this room. Okay, and the general meeting will take place here. Thank you all.